Hello and welcome. I'm Nick Butts and this is Nick Butts Chess. This is a ongoing series. This will be episode 2 of Every Move Explained. And in this episode, we have a game by Bobby Fischer versus Stevens, played in Cleveland in 1957 at the US Open. And so this game begins with e4, and Bobby Fischer used to call this move best by test. And this move, it controls the center and it also allows your bishop to develop and your queen as well, and it's a good move to make if you like attacking tactical games, as usually e4 openings, the center has a lot of tactical possibilities. The pawns usually are traded away in the center. And so let's continue. c5, the Sicilian defense, which covers and fights for this d4 square. And so if white moves the d4 pawn, black will be able to counterattack, capturing it with a pawn that is not one of the central pawns. So in this exchange, it would leave black with 2 central pawns to white's 1 after this d4 exchange. And so the next move is knight to f3. So this helps control the center. It will cover the advance of the d4 pawn, and it develops a piece off the back rank, allowing white to get closer to castling on the king side if he chooses to do so. And d6. So this move, it controls the central e5 square. It allows this bishop to develop. But also, if later in the game, black moves knight to f6 and this pawn on e4 is pushed to attack the knight, then this d6 pawn will be able to capture that pawn after the pawn push. And so here we have d4, allowing this bishop on c1 to develop, but also fighting for control of the center. And black does not want to allow this big central pawn formation. So he captures with his c pawn, breaking the central pawn formation, and white recaptures, keeping material even. And so now we have knight to f6, attacking, developing and attacking this e4 pawn. And so white moves the knight to c3, protecting the pawn, developing, controlling the center. And this move also covers this d5 square, which is important in the Sicilian defense. Many times one of black's goals in the Sicilian defense is to push this pawn, the d pawn, to d5. And in doing this, it would free black's game more, allowing his pieces to have better mobility and be less restricted by the pawns in the center here. And so now we have g6. So this will allow the bishop to develop on g7 and black to castle kingside. And this is the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense, named because the pawn formation here looks similar to a dragon perhaps. And bishop to e3. So this is usually the signal for the Yugoslav attack against the Sicilian Dragon. And this bishop is able to move here and not be harassed by this knight. You think that if the bishop moves to e3, why doesn't this knight just attack the bishop and it's protected by this bishop? But if that would happen, black would run into problems with a bishop to b5 check. And now if the bishop would just block the queen can capture because this bishop is pinned. And another option would be after knight to g4, bishop to b5. If he blocked with a knight, then you have a series of exchanges, and white is better in this position. He would just be up material in the end. And so that is why in the position back here with after bishop to e3, we have this knight to c6 move and not the knight to g4 move attacking the bishop. So here we have knight to c6, so developing the other knight, attacking this knight on d4, and fighting for control of the center. And it also blocks this check, potential check by the bishop here on b5. And so now white plays f3, which does prevent the knight from harassing this bishop in the future. And it fortifies this e4 pawn. Okay, bishop to g7. The bishop, this dragon bishop as it is known, takes this great diagonal down through the center of the board and attacking the queen side. And so this is usually a very dangerous bishop in the dragon, Sicilian Dragon variation. And white usually tries to exchange this bishop off, so this black bishop will not give him problems in the future. And so queen to d2, creating a battery up to this h6 square to trade off this bishop. And this develops the queen off the back rank, allowing queenside castling as well. And so castling by black, he gets his king safe, and the rook is developed closer to the center as well. And now we have bishop to c4. So this develops the bishop, it attacks the center, but more importantly, it helps control this d5 square to prevent the d5 pawn push that we talked about earlier, that black in the Sicilian defense usually tries to make happen to free his position some. And so here we have a6. Black is preparing for a queenside attack. Here he can push forward attacking this bishop, and usually in this opening white will castle queenside, and as black has castled kingside, we have opposite side castling. And in that case, it is generally better to attack with a pawn storm by pushing your pawns forward and then funneling your pieces in behind your pawn attack. And that happens quite often in these opposite side castling games, where it'll be a race on either side to see who can break through first. And so a6, preparing a b5 pawn push to attack the bishop and gain space on the queen side. So now queenside castling by white, getting his king safer out of the middle of the board and moving his rook to the center where it can help fight for this d file. And queen to c7, developing the queen. It also controls this diagonal. That way, if white pushes forward on e5, the queen can help guard this e5 square, and the queen from here will bear down on the king down the c file. And also the queen had a potential attack on this bishop, so that's why the bishop moved to c4, or excuse me, moved from c4 to b3 to prevent any surprise attacks on that bishop by the queen. And so here, this may have been a little early to open up the position. Black wants to attack and get his attack going, but he leaves himself vulnerable on this diagonal. And we'll see how the game continues here. So black pushed this pawn to commence a queenside attack, but white counters by first capturing this knight on c6, and the queen must recapture to keep material even, but black is already starting to have some trouble on coming his way here shortly. So let's see. Queen recaptures. And now we have this knight jumping to the d5 square, blocking any forward movement by this d6 pawn, but also threatening a fork of the queen and the king. And so black is already in trouble here. And here the king moves to h8. And you may think, well, he must guard this pawn, but he's already in trouble. Anything that he tries will leave him behind in material. So as an example, if he moves queen to b7 to try and protect this pawn, then we have this little combination here. Knight captures, checking the king. And if there's a recapture, then we have bishop to d5, which would attack the queen, and once the queen moves, the bishop would capture the rook, and so play would commence like this. And here white would just be ahead in material, and so black is in trouble. And instead of the queen to b7 move trying to guard this e7 pawn, in the game after knight to d5 we have king to h8. That way, if this pawn is taken on e7, he will not have a fork on the king and the queen. And so the game continues with knight takes f6, capturing one of the defenders of the king side. And here, instead of capturing, this pawn is pushed forward to help block this attacking bishop, and it will also cover this d5 square to help with a possible push forward of this pawn to d5. But it's already too late for black. White, he moves bishop to h6. So here, now if this knight is recaptured, we have the capture of the rook. And so black is just losing now, but the game continues with bishop to b7, bishop to b7. Here he tries to develop this bishop and connect his rooks and get some kind of play in the center of the board or wherever he can, but he's already in trouble. Here, after this capture of the g7 bishop by white, another defender of black's king has been removed. And so after a recapture to regain the material, we have the knight retreating as it was attacked by the king. And now f5, attacking the knight and this pawn. If you're behind in material, as black is here, it is usually a good decision to try and trade off pawns. And the reason to do that is because if you get rid of all the pawns and your opponent, after all the pieces are traded, is only ahead by one knight or one bishop, then the game would end in a draw, because you cannot win with just a king and a knight or a king and a bishop against a lone king. So by exchanging the pawns, there's less chance of queening of those pawns when you're already behind in material, and it would just be worse if your opponent gains even more material by queening a pawn. And so anyway, we'll continue here. The knight is under attack, so pawn capture to prevent the knight from being captured. A recapture of the pawn by the rook. And the queen captures in the center, removing a central pawn, attacking. And here a counterattack of the knight by this pawn move. And now check by white. And here black is really in trouble. Block of the check. And here we have another nice little combination by Fischer. Capture, sacrificing the queen temporarily as the king recaptures. And then knight to e5, forking the king and the queen. And capture, recapture. And so white was ahead in material, and it's usually a good idea to give back a little bit of material if it helps your attack later in the game, instead of trying to hold on to that material, because black is behind. The more material that is exchanged off, the more pieces, the more trouble black is going to be in, because he has less defenders to fight with or counterattack with. And so here, this rook to e1 move bears down on this pawn and the king, fights for central control, and it's just a better spot for this rook to have more mobility. And the bishop moves to defend this pawn, which is attacked by the rook and the bishop. And once again, white gives up a little bit of material to remove one of black's few remaining pieces. And here, if the king captured, white would still be ahead. A full bishop, and this pawn would fall in the middle, and then we would have a pawn majority on both sides by white. So black resigned here, knowing that it was only a matter of time before he would be checkmated in the future. And so this was Bobby Fischer with white playing against Stevens at the US Open in Cleveland in 1957. I hope you enjoyed this game, and please like and subscribe if you have enjoyed this, and feel free to leave comments and suggestions. Thank you, and have a great day.